Hello and welcome to the 42 Rugby Show in association with Cadbury Boost. We're delighted to be coming from the Aviva fan studio here in the Aviva Stadium today, where we're hoping Ireland will be facing England for a Six Nations title in 2 weekends' time. Before that, of course, is a trip to Cardiff, and joining us to preview that action is Johne Murphy here in the Aviva. Now, we're going to talk about Ireland's challenge against the Welsh attack, in particular Rhys Webb's sniping game and the set-piece attack, and lots more to come as well, Johnny. How are you, first of all?
Good. Thank you very much for having me back again.
Great to have you back. First of all, a bit of breaking news, I guess, overnight and this morning. Ian Madigan is going to Bristol on a 3-year deal, a club that looks destined for the championship. What do you make of that move?
I suppose probably from Ian's perspective, probably a small bit disappointing for him how it's kind of all come to an end over in Bordeaux. I know he has a few months left, but I suppose he wanted to go sample a new lifestyle, new playing style, and unfortunately it's not worked out for him. Thing about Bristol is, after the weekend it looks like they probably will get relegated, but they want to move places. Pat Lamb's come in, he's obviously been given probably 3 to 5 years in total, and the owner, he owns a soccer club as well. He wants Bristol to be a hotbed of sport in general in that area in England. So he'll have a year playing in the championship, which I suppose will be tough at times. But with the other players who they signed, I think they'll certainly bounce straight back up with ease. And if they manage to add to the roster that they're already adding to, I think they could be a real force in the Premiership in 2 years' time.
Yeah, I mean, he's out of the Ireland picture now in Bordeaux. Does this even push him further out of Joe Schmidt's plans?
You probably would reckon so. He is closer to home though, and I suppose in a year's time he probably felt that when he left to go to Bordeaux that he was going to be out of the reckoning for 2 years anyway. So a year in the championship doesn't necessarily kind of harbour his timelines to get back into the Irish setup. So he'll be back in the Premiership year before the World Cup, and if they play well, then he has to be looked at. So I think he probably just resigned himself that 2 years probably out in the wilderness, and that's a decision he's made. But if we're back in the Premiership in a year's time, he should be able to push his case again.
Over $500,000 a year as well will certainly be compensation for that. There's been a bit more movement in the transfer market. Leinster have signed Scott Fardy and James Lowe over from New Zealand. I mean, what does that say about Leinster's ambition on the European front? Yeah,
well, I think Scott Fardy's probably, they're looking at that Nathan Hines, Brad Thorne-esque kind of persona in the dressing room, that hard-nosed edge, that hard edge to the second row, and I suppose the back three is such a competitive area. Adding to it already, they could probably pick 3 back threes. That other one, the likes of Adam Byrne, who's had a breakthrough season this year and played so well. You forget Dave Carney's been injured, Fergus McFadden has been injured. So, it just adds a huge amount of strength and depth that they already have. People are going to be looking at them, and they really want to step forward. And they've made some very astute signings. Probably Stuart Lancaster, probably one of the best that they have done this year. So I think they're certainly going to be thereabouts in the years to come.
That squad on paper now is just going to be even more ridiculous to look at. I certainly think they're going to be right at the challenging for that competition. Of course, big Six Nations weekend ahead. Ireland are up against Wales. We've seen probably two sides of the Welsh so far. Really physical, really aggressive against the English, in defeat albeit, and then a really disappointing performance last time out against Scotland. What do you expect Ireland to face in Cardiff?
I think it's going to be a proud performance from the Welsh. They've lost 2. Their hopes of winning the championship are gone, and I think that back home Friday night, whether the roof is open or closed, it's going to be a fantastic occasion. And I think it's probably something that the Welsh players are like, we want to put in a performance for the supporters. I suppose they felt they probably let their supporters down a small bit, but I think the performance in Scotland, people are saying, no, they didn't perform, but you have to give credit to Scotland. Scotland are a very good side, and for me, it's something I've been saying over the last couple of weeks. I don't really understand why people are underrating Scotland so much. Glasgow are on, they're on the up. The spine of that Scottish team has, qualified for the quarterfinals of the European Cup for the first time ever, and they're playing a really good brand of rugby, smart, intelligent rugby, and I think they're a really good side. Wales just haven't fired. I don't think they're that good, but in relative speaking, in terms of where they have been over the last couple of years, but they're very dangerous on Friday night purely because their pride is hurt, and they're going to come out fighting, and probably it's going to be probably a tougher battle on Friday than it would be if they had beaten the Scots up in Murrayfield, just based on the pride factor alone.
Yeah, that emotion is going to be immense. And I was listening to Paul O'Connell commentating on that England-Wales match, and he was saying he'd never experienced that kind of emotion in a stadium. He'd never been there for an England-Wales match. I can only imagine that's going to be amplified as they kind of fight for their lives in this competition. We've seen them try to develop their attack a little bit, I think. What are the, especially with Rob Howley now, the kind of top man. Warren Gatland's gone to work with the Lions. Howley, of course, had a spell in 2013, a really successful one, when he was head coach, and they won that championship. Not so good around this time around, but what are you seeing maybe tactically that he's trying to push with this team?
Well, I suppose it's probably the late runners at the line that they've expanded on. And I think we'll look at Liam Williams and how Reece Webb controls that area. He runs at 9. He interests defenders at 2 and sometimes even 3 at times in the defensive line, and he just produces late shoulder balls that it's not just probably the Warren ball as old. There's a bit more. There's probably just a bit more to it, and it's just the late runners arriving on shoulder balls that probably wasn't there before. It was all physical. It was get up, get round the corner, get to an edge, and then try and get back to the other edge, where there's a bit more subtlety to it, I suppose.
That was successful for such a long time as well, but yeah, you do kind of have to develop. I think we've seen them, they've moved to that 1-3-3-1 shape even in phase play, and you see Justin Tipperick or Warburton now in the 15-metre channel. It certainly suits Tipperick to play that style. But you mentioned Reece Webb, and we're actually going to take a look at one of the examples of him kind of sniping at the fringe defence. He's brilliant in this area, and it was particularly strong against the Scottish. In this example, we see him in the top left. He comes to a ruck, and he's set to pick up here. He spots that the pillar defender for Scotland is only actually arriving, so he's kind of folding around the corner. So straight away, a clear opportunity. You mentioned the guys kind of running off him, and that's the real key. You can't just do it on your own. You imagine a scrum half sniping and just being a kind of individualistic genius, but it's about those guys coming off his shoulder. And here he has Justin Tipperick interesting the second defender out from the ruck, who is Richie Gray. So there's already space opening up there for Webb. Because of that late arrival of the pillar. When we move down to the third image here, we can see that he's actually decided to have that go himself inside the A defender for Scotland, who's Richie Gray again, attracted by Tipperick just to Webb's right, just here. So he's got a bit of space. He actually has a chance to flick an inside ball to a late runner again. So you're seeing all those options for Wales. Just off a simple midfield kind of ruck, and Webb goes through the line. In this case, he actually throws a really poor offload, but it's that constant danger around the fringe, and I think Ireland are going to have to be really tight in that area.
And that's probably a system, it's probably a system area. Gray there in that situation, he has to recognise that he's at, pillar 2 or A or whatever you call it in your defensive system. He is there. He has to marshal 9. He can't be looking at the runners outside. They're not his. And that was we'll talk later about Jonathan Joseph as well. You have to know where the ball is. You can't defend the runners in front of you. There's no point defending your channel on your own. You have to build your connections, whether it's late or early, preferably early, but if you have a late pillar, you have to get your connection on the inside and come forward, but you also have to marshal, you also have to know who you're responsible for. So if you're at 2 in the defensive line, you're controlling 9, so you have to come forward off the line, and if he takes the ball to the line, then you have to jam it up, everyone else outside you, rather than looking in front. This is my space, I don't care what happens inside me, I have to look after this space, which then creates all the problems.
Yeah, so in this case, going back to our example again, we're looking at Richie Gray as that A defender, as we're going to turn him. He goes too early. It's a simple little mistake, but it happens so frequently in the game, and we've seen maybe Ireland's defensive errors come from the organisation around that ruck. We're talking about problems out wide, but often it's organisation of those first 3 defenders. Yeah. So really big challenge.
That can be an ethos that spreads through the team. I think that Anthony Foley had a huge thing that they can come round us. They just never go through us, and that's something that if your men short, get in close and use a touchline. As he always said himself, the touchline never went anywhere. It's the best defender on the pitch. It never goes anywhere. It's always there to help you out. So get in close and push him to an edge if your number's down. And that's something that I think that situation there, Gray needs to understand, okay, they're not coming through us. Get in tight, get forward, and don't worry, we'll jam it up outside, and if they do get around us, you have to trust your back three that they'll make those covering tackles on the edge.
Certainly Webb is making really good decisions. It's interesting to see his head-to-head against Conor Murray, another guy who snipes well and really good at identifying those opportunities. Where do you see that particular Lions battle? Because Gatland's going to be there. There's actually so many different head-to-heads to keep an eye on. Is that kind of in the background of this tie, do you think?
I suppose it probably is to a certain extent, with the emotion and what's on the line. I don't think the lads can get too carried away in that. For me, Conor is streets ahead of everyone. He's probably the best 9 in the world at the moment, and that's just how he's performed over the last 3 games. It's probably down to Danny Kerr, Ben Youngs and Rhys Webb for that bench spot. They all offer something similar in terms of coming off the bench, as we spoke about, getting to those those A defenders, bringing attackers off their shoulders late. So I really like Rhys Webb as a player. I think he just offers something different. For me, the 3 9s would be Conor, Ben Youngs. I suppose I'm a bit biased, haven't played with Ben, but Ben and Rhys Webb. I just think that even when we played against him at the Ospreys, even when he came off the bench or during international periods, he just adds something to the game. There's always that, what can he do? And I think he just, he's the stereotypical ratty scrum-half, which you want. And I think, he's playing well enough that he could be second choice at the moment.
Loads of nice head-to-heads in that regard. For Warren Gatland anyway to enjoy. The rest of us are still focusing on Six Nations, but he's enjoying himself touring the stadiums. One of the other things we want to look at, we've got it set up here on the table, but just to run through the example, was the set-piece attack. And this is something I think Rob Howley has brought in. It's a very simple set-piece attack, but it's kind of built on the threat of big Scottish ball carriers like Scott Williams or Jamie Roberts if he's on the pitch, and Jonathan Davies being really direct. And this example here is against England in the first game. It's a try-off first phase, left-hand scrum in the 22. And we should mention, before we kind of delve into this, that in previous set pieces, the Welsh have actually run over or through George Ford at 10. So the English are already a bit wary of that. So it's a left-hand scrum. Ross Moriarty plays off the base of the scrum to Rhys Webb, getting off the set piece and already adding in an extra body in the attacking line. So George Ford immediately has to kind of concern himself with that threat. So you're already kind of down a body in the defensive line almost. Liam Williams is the key man. He's kind of hidden in behind the scrum half here. He's going to be the try scorer. But from further out the line, we've got Scott Williams just here, and he's going to run a really direct line back against the grain and to Owen Farrell's inside shoulder. So when we move on to the second image here, we can see that Webb just here is getting towards the line. Now, I think you're going to go through it. Once Wales get into that position, England are going to have to be a bit more aware that, right, they're not going to make 2 passes here. We've got to actually jam in and fill that. But the danger, I suppose, is a late pass out the back door to Jonathan Davies and Dan Bigger here at the back door. So there's all sorts of options for the English defence rather to deal with. And Williams gets a really good block or a decoy line into the inside shoulder of Owen Farrell, completely tracks him in. You see that Jonathan Joseph here has been attracted up and out by those 2 Welsh attackers. So basically it opens up a huge hole, and Liam Williams is able to go in under there. You do have Jack Noel covering across from behind the scrum, but he's just a little bit late, and Williams is able to dive under the posts. I guess what's really interesting for the Irish in this sense is the midfield, and Jared Payne is now back in the mix. First of all, what maybe could England have done better in that example, and does it actually mean that Joe Schmidt is going to go, hang on, this is what Wales are doing really well, I need to maybe bring Payne back in?
Well, I think you have 2 ways of defending it. One is actually how they defend it, but then you have to get the correct read from Jonathan Joseph at 13. You have to realise that when the 9 takes the ball to the line, that every defender needs to jam up. So you actually want to show them that line in defence, because if you come forward really hard off the line, they're not going to be able to make 2 flat passes on the gain line because you're stopping the ball. There's another, and I think that's, we wouldn't be talking about it if Jonathan Joseph actually had made the correct decision. In that moment, as you said, he gets caught looking at his zone rather than, okay, Rhys has the ball, let's hold, now let's jam it up. And I think it's his decision making that creates his error, his defensive error there that actually creates the try. And The second way is where if you were to drop the 9 in behind, so you leave a connection there that can be built between the winger and 6 if they do a rollout blind, where 9 comes in there, and then we all shift one out, which means we have an extra man in the line, and like that we all just try and jam it up. You stay in your channel and you jam it up.
Extra body in there.
In a sense, yeah.
Yeah, because it's not just off these scrums. We've seen it off lineouts where they use maybe Scott Williams to bash it up on the first couple of phases or the first couple of set pieces, and then they go with a little screen pass to George North and Liam Williams. I think it's probably a smarter development in that Welsh attack to have that little bit of variety, even though it is still quite simple and easy for the backs to execute.
And I think it's something that, like we've spoken about already in terms of defensive system, you know, what's your ethos? If the ball comes to the line, do you jam it up, or do you sit off, or do you just let individuals make reads? Where I think the collective need to defend together, and, you know, defend together in your threes. Get your connection inside, get your connection outside, and then do what the defender inside you does. That's probably why Jared Payne is so good at reading things. Not necessarily that he makes the correct decision all the time. It's that he reads what Robbie Henshaw does inside him. If Robbie makes a bad decision, Jared in his mind is going, okay, well, that's a bad decision. I can't compound that error. I have to now, you know, cover his back and make the correct decision outside him, which is generally doing what he's done. And I think like that, Jonathan Joseph didn't recognise the foul, turned his shoulders in. Okay, well, it's on the line. Let's just jam it up and we hit there, which would actually be in effect a gain line win if he does make that tackle there on Liam Williams.
Fine margins. But in terms of that 13, I think it's probably the biggest selection call, or the most debated one, certainly over the next couple of days. What way do you see it going? Like, Joe Schmidt he's had that combination of Sexton, Henshaw, Payne for some big wins and some big moments. Does he go straight back to that, or does he back that, I suppose, promise of Gary Ringrose at 13?
I suppose, you know, I would like to see Gary continue in there. I think he's just so close to making those full-on line breaks. It's like he's a centimetre away. He just gets grabbed by the jersey that last second when he's about to make that break, and he's starting to make those half breaks a lot more. So he's getting used to it, and I think, for me, I would like him to see him continue in that. Joe Smith, if you look back over the history of his selections, he kind of goes back to what is his tried and tested combinations, and that probably is Jared Payne at 13 this weekend. It's very interesting to see, if you watch the documentary on the 4 days of November that RTE did. I think it's probably, you know, how Payne is spoken about by the group. He's spoken about as the general in defence, and, you know, he organises a huge amount. Gary Ringrose even mentions it when he's been interviewed. So to have that coming back into what is essentially a semi-final, really, no matter what happens in Twickenham, to have that within the group alone is going to add. So for those reasons, I would probably see Jared Payne coming back in.
I have to agree with you. I wouldn't be surprised to see that, and maybe Ringrose on the bench, especially now that Trimble's out injured, so you've got your wingers aside there, and Ringrose has done that 23 role and done it quite well in the past. So yeah, it'd be brilliant for Ireland's future, and wouldn't be a big negative if Ringrose does continue, but I don't think we'd be too surprised to see Payne in that 13 shirt. No. We're going to take a quick question from the audience. Ross Murphy says, tactically, how do you think Joe Schmidt will combat the ferocious physicality the Welsh will bring? This is kind of what we actually want to discuss next, is in terms of Ireland's tactical approach for this game. We've seen the Welsh lap up kind of direct attack against them. Even if you go back to 2015, in Cardiff, Ireland against Wales, there was a passage with 32 phases of Irish attack, really direct, trying to bash their way over, ended up going nowhere, and a massive win for the Welsh, a huge psychological boost against England in round one. Even when Youngs did score a try, it took 26 phases. We saw when Dan Biggar intercepted against the English, there were 20 phases before that, so they're very comfortable at getting through a huge amount of work rate in their defence. Do you think Ireland need to go and actually take that on aggressively and directly, or do they play around it and try and negate it that way? Well,
I think you need to try. Rugby's a physical game. You need to try and win the physical battle first off, and win it in whatever way you want. If, you know, like the French, they were never going to win the physical battle on the gain line, but what they tried to do was move the point of contact and beat them up in the wider channels, get them gassing, and then try and hurt them out wide, and I think they did that successfully. It's kind of similar in a sense this weekend, but, you know, I think you'll probably see a huge emphasis on those 4 or 5 those 4 or 5 phase plays, the power plays that Joe Smith is renowned for. Try and break them down early, get those line breaks in, and create a sense of confusion amongst the front line, and try and get into the backfield early and move the ball then after you've got in behind them. And on top of that, I think they're multi-phase. When they do get past 5th and 6th phase, they need to be a bit more creative in terms of what they're doing. They're certainly layering that. Johnny Sexton, you showed by the rap play that he's done so successfully for the last 5 or 6 years. I think, add on to them, layer them up, and you want to be sending 2 attackers into one defender's channel, make a decision on the line, and have those one pass plays that can break them down, and then it's just about your decision making on the line and making the correct decision. I think Johnny Sexton is probably one of the best in the world at making those decisions really late on the line and putting people in holes. Yeah,
because you mentioned those, flooding into one channel, one defender against 2 attackers. The Welsh actually haven't made great decisions on the edge in particular. The wingers, Cuthbert, who's been sacrificed because of those mistakes against England, but also North and Williams, even Williams against the Scottish when they scored down the right through Tommy Seymour. There was two defenders in front of him. He made the wrong decision. He bid in. So they haven't always looked comfortable in the area they were.
That was something that, when it happened, the commentators were like, oh, that's crossing. It actually wasn't. It was a really bad dummy line and then an even worse defensive read in the line out wide. Like, there was no way he was in front of the ball. There was no way he was actually going to ever get the ball. And he had enough time just to push off and go outside. And the fact that he turned his shoulders, on the 50 and kind of, in this area here, just meant they'd all that space out wide to attack. And I think that's something that Ireland can go after, and the rap play that was done, even do maybe one out, do it with 13 and 15 coming short, and then Henshaw coming out the back, just create that doubt out wide in those wider channels.
Yeah, you mentioned that loop play. We're actually going to take a look at one of the examples against France because they just went back to it again and again. I spoke to Robbie Henshaw after the match and he said, I'm pretty sure that's Johnny's favourite play of all time. He keeps calling it, but it works so well, and one of the reasons it works so well is because it's kind of multifaceted. There are several options. In this instance, Ireland are playing off a kind of collapse maul here, and Conor Murray sends this tunnel pass in behind Henshaw, who does a good job of actually sitting down Louis Picamoles. So you mentioned kind of mixing up. There is a slight tweak on it here. It's not going to be the centres that are running the loop play. Johnny Sexton gets the ball on that tunnel pass from Murray, and he hits Gary Ringrose, who's going to be the kind of hub, I suppose, of the loop play. What he's got is a really good line from Rob Kearney just outside him. Kearney comes really direct, straight up the pitch with his hips towards the post, and he's going to place a really big decision-making stress on Gael Ficou on the edge. We mentioned actually sitting down 2 defenders, and that's what Ringrose does here. He gets Lopez and Lamara tied into that one collision, and he's so subtle in his execution. I think that was one of the things as well. Paddy Jackson actually ran a couple of loop plays against the Scots, for example, but the actual passing player in the middle of the loop wasn't always perfect in their decision making or their body language. Here Ringrose actually doesn't show. He doesn't look back over his shoulder to find Sexton. He actually just pops a short little pass, and that's what really makes it difficult for Gael Ficou, because the pass almost looked like it's going to go to Rob Kearney. Goes out the back door, of course, instead. Johnny Sexton's able to break there and kick ahead. Pressure from Keith Earls. Uge makes the error and Nakatasi touches down. Try follows from that scrum. Really brilliant execution. But I guess, can you talk us through specifically in terms of that little loop play?
I think
why it works so well. What are the
I think there's a couple of things. First off, you have Robbie Henshaw in that exact example. Robbie Henshaw runs a real line, and I think real lines is probably what makes this move work so successfully all the time.
Real line as in they could actually get the ball.
They could get up, and they're expecting the ball on the line. And I think that it's only at the top level, it's those split second decisions that really cause confusion. So just one French defender slightly bites in for a second on Robbie Henshaw, then he has to get back out. That's created doubt already in the French defensive line. When the ball goes to Johnny and it goes to Gary Ringrose here, he can carry. The fact that he's not looking for Johnny, he's got loads of leg speed, he's attacking the line, he's interested in his defender. Same with Rob Kearney. Rob Kearney runs a real line, he's engaged Ficou, and that means that he has to turn his shoulders. If Ficou goes forward and leaves Carney through. Carney will just run through that hole there. So he has to stay connected. Has to, as we spoke about earlier, he has to know what his inside man is doing. 12 has sat down on Gary Ringrose. Fico has to turn his shoulders in on Rob Carney, which allows Johnny go out the back. It's then down to the winger to also, but because they've done it higher up the field, the winger can't come up and close the gate as hard as he wants to. You have to look after the backfield. Now, the backfield in French, from the French perspective, is kind of non-existent. They kind of defend. The back three wouldn't be the best in it in the world. So, you're playing, and this is something that Wales haven't been good at either. They've been making, they've been trying to load the. When people have played the Welsh, they've been loading the defenders out wide. And I think that's something that running these plays is really going to test the guys on the edge, because as you saw against Scotland, they make bad reads on the edge, and that's what's going to allow Ireland get in behind them and create those line breaks.
Yeah, those real lines are really interesting, because even within this French game, there were other instances of Ireland running a loop play, and Ringrose, or Henshaw as it was, did actually carry or did drop the short pass. So it's that variety, and it's kind of fascinating how such a simple little play can have so many different opportunities.
It's you've got three options here, and you've actually, if you go back to the iPad, you'll see that Simon Zebo's in behind, so you can actually layer it up even more, where Simon here. So if they actually do bite, and the winger is connected, it can go to Johnny. Johnny's marked up, but it can go late there to Simon, who'll end up running through a hole.
So in our example there's Zebo just here on Sexton's inside shoulder, and he can pop back inside.
Yeah, he can pop. He can, but even if they bring loads of line speed, and Johnny doesn't have time to go back inside, Gary can go straight to Zebo here, so he can go run in that hole. So it's very much real lines all the time, and I think that's what will create those holes in multi-phase, and will just plant that seed of doubt in the Welsh defensive line.
Must be absolutely infuriating to get cut open by something you've seen so often, especially from Ireland.
But it's a simple play, but if it's run correctly all the time, it's very hard to defend, because what you're doing is you're sending 4 tacklers into 3 zones. So technically, someone's going to be free. You just have to pick the right option.
Yeah, decision making. It's all your opponent gives you the options, as Steve Hansen always reminds us. In terms of Irish defence, this is going to be a really physical challenge, I guess. Is this maybe the opportunity for Andy Farrell's stamp to really come out, because we're expecting this really attritional battle? Is this the time now for his defensive stamp, I suppose, to be telling?
Yeah, I think they've probably had 40 minutes of a hiccup against Scotland, and from there on they've been very, very good. They were put under a lot of pressure the first 10-15 minutes of the French game, but they withheld it. They withstood that pressure, and they got on top then. It was very interesting. I did something with Sean Cronin, and he said, I was talking to him, and one of the big things that Andy Farrell, he's no wastage. So, and we were actually talking about that example against Scotland, and he was like, that would drive Andy Farrell up the wall, because there's 5 guys on the blind side that are completely wasted. And I think if you can get that right, make smart decisions, then that will allow them, as we spoke about previously, bring that line speed up until probably 5 or 6 in the defensive line, which means they can taper and drift on the edge and use the touchline, where it looks like Wales are playing all the rugby, where actual fact it's gain line win after gain line win, and it's frustrating for the attack. And I think if they can swarm them up in that area, and I suppose that's why you probably would go back to Jared Payne, because he brings that, and he brings that chat. One of the most interesting things for me is, in my coaching, is that I kind of pick out different things, and I watch different games, but I listen to Jared Payne on a player mic for Ulster one day in the European Cup. He talked for 80 minutes solid, but like his chat was impeccable. It was, I've got your inside, okay, come with me, and it's just those, it's that clear and concise chat in the defensive line that just breeds confidence through the whole, and I think that's why Jared Payne is probably going to go back in and start this weekend.
And Joe Schmidt has mentioned that he allows other people to defend better. He's spoken about it with Jamie Heaslip as well, and if you're listening to Ref Mike, every single game Jamie Heaslip is around the fringes of the rucks, really concise, as you say. It's not just shouting, it's not just volume for the opposition.
It's not white noise, it's clear communication that will, will get in. So, and that's what you want in the heat of battle. And it, there's 60, 70,000 people there. There's loads of noise. You don't want noise on top of noise. You want clear chat, which is going to resonate in your, oh yeah, okay, I've got your insight. Yeah, okay, fine. I can now go forward. It's that's what creates a really good defensive line and gives good pictures and will frustrate the attacking team.
One of the little things we just wanted to look at before we finish talking about Ireland's defence is something around their kind of defensive exit strategies from the opposition. It's just a brief little thing. It's Conor Murray kind of shooting up ahead of the line, and I think this is actually what eventually developed into Italy's no ruck tactic. Conor O'Shea spoke about they tried to clarify a decision where Conor Murray, they felt had been offside in their 22, and the feedback was actually there was no ruck there. So I don't think Conor Murray was actually aware of it himself, but they go, hang on, that's interesting. So basically what Conor Murray does, he hangs in behind the line when Ireland are defending against an exit. We see him just here. It's kind of sweeping as most scrum-halves would, but he started timing his runs. He's been doing this for a couple of months now. He started timing his runs superbly so that before the scrum-half even has his hands on the ball, Conor Murray is sprinting into the line and he gets ahead of his teammates and invariably gets close to a block. He hasn't got one yet, but my prediction is he's going to get a block down before the end of this tournament. He's getting very close. Against Scotland, actually, he pressured Stuart Hogg into 3 poor kicks in field. Unfortunately, Ireland's counter-attacking or kick return game isn't quite there yet, but loads of little opportunities, I think, off that, and it'll be interesting to see it again. It's a little tweak, but something simple can be effective.
Yeah, and it's just kind of smart. It's just, he's building up speed. It means he can get ahead. Obviously, it's a tactic. The defensive line know he's doing it, so they're not going to shift out of line. They're going to stay in. They're going to stay marking their channels. And if Conor runs into your channel, he runs past you. Matter the ball, you can, you can cover the space that he leaves anyway. So it's just a speed thing. He just gets off the mark and really good timing in that area, and just puts a huge amount of pressure on exits. And if you can get in that area, if you can get a bad exit to give you that opportunity to counter, that's a massive win. It's a huge win defensively, so high up the pitch.
Yeah, and we've seen with Wales already how damaging a poor exit can be. That obviously England tried that one for them, Elliot Daly wide in the left, so I think Wales will be a little bit wary of that. We're going to take a couple of questions from our audience. Conor Miles has been on. He says, is there room for Payne or Carberry in the team? I guess we've already talked about Payne pushing a little bit to try and get straight back in there, but in terms of that selection, do you see him mixing it up much, Joe Schmidt?
I don't really think so. I think Jackson is, probably if he was playing for most other countries he'd be a starter. It's just the fact that Johnny Sexton is ahead of him. So I think it's probably very clear 1 and 2. But Joey Carberry has really put himself. He's playing in a variety of different positions since he's come back from injury, which is going to stand to him in the future, getting involved in squads, and will help his experience and will continue his learning through the game. So look, I think he's certainly going to tour in the summer. He'll be in America, he'll probably be in Japan, and I think Johnny, if fit, he goes on the Lions. So it means that Joe Carberry is going to get his opportunity this summer, like a couple other guys, I think. Yeah,
absolutely. Conor, thanks so much for that question. We've got one from Gordon Bridgefield here. Based on the Six Nations so far, how many Irish players should make the Lions squad? You've just touched on it, but guys who are standing out now. I think obviously there's a huge amount of chatter around CJ. I think his stats and what he's done defensively, he's right up there at the moment. I think Tadhg Furlong in with a huge shout of probably starting. Same with Jack McGrath. I think that all the starting front row will travel. Second row, it's probably that's a very, very tight call. Devin Toner is running the line out exceptionally well at the moment. So, he's certainly in the mix. I think it's really weird. Ireland are playing quite well at the moment, so you can make a case. Everyone but for me, I think an outside shot and someone that has performed exceptionally well during the year, I think, is Keith Earls. I think he's really back to the best he's played for years, probably. And I think he just feels comfortable. He's taken on the role in Munster so well, and he's leading now, and he always did lead, but he's just he's comfortable in that now, and he really, I think, for me personally, it'd be great to see Earlsy travel. I think he's put in some fantastic performances over the last 6 months. I think that the definites are the halfbacks and probably the front stage to travel. Outside of that,
it comes down to, you know, who probably plays well in the last 2 games and how far the Irish teams get in the, you know, in the Champions Cup. People underestimate how important the quarterfinals and semi-finals are in the selection process of the Lions. And like Keith Earls, when he travelled previously, he had played exceptionally well. Didn't feature, I think, in the Six Nations a lot, but was involved in the squad. But he played exceptionally well in the quarter-final win against Ospreys, and then again. And I think that's probably what got him into her. That I think the quarterfinals and semi-finals are going to play a massive part in that selection role. You
mentioned Sean Cronin earlier on. Even someone like him, getting back from injury,
yeah,
has a profile that would really suit a squad touring. So a guy that may not even feature in the Six Nations, or certainly won't at this stage, actually improving on his form with Leinster through the end of the season and actually getting into the line. So yeah, thanks for that question. We have another one from Owen McKenna here. Why haven't Ireland fixed their defending out wide? He puts it pretty bluntly. What's the issue there?
I think I don't necessarily agree with that. I think visually it looks like they're not defending correctly because they're kind of the edge, but they're drifting on the edge because of the line speed that 4, 5 and 6 have brought in the middle of the park. I think that question's probably coming from the first 30 minutes, 40 minutes against Scotland.
2
incidents that I think is it all comes actually down to the basics, and the wastage that we spoke about earlier on is an issue. And I think that's something that needs, if you don't have enough numbers around the corner, you're kind of damned if you do, damned if you don't on the edge, because you come out of the line trying to stop the ball. If you don't stop the ball, then you look silly. If you just drift and they end up getting loads of gain line, or if you drift and they end up going on your inside, you look silly again. So like saying the pillar A, B, as we spoke about, get round the corner, get set, and don't have any incidents, like Gray in the line where he doesn't know where the ball is. Know where the ball is, come forward and defend together. That will allow you to make correct decisions on the edge.
Sounds simple.
It does.
Thanks, Owen, for the question. That's unfortunately all we have time for. Thanks so much for joining us again.
Cheers. Thanks for having me.
Hopefully building up to a Six Nations decider here in the Aviva. Catch you then.